We love that college football is coming, but do we love everything about it? I hesitate to use the word hate, and maybe there are some teams in this early going that are a bit under the radar already. This is the College GameDay Podcast for Thursday, June 13th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here. Pete, fresh off the Dan Hurley watch, so we put that to bed. Hurley staying in Storrs, Connecticut. Don't know if UConn is one of your under-the-radar teams that we'll talk about in college football coming up. Pete, you have
the odds of officials being unhappy with the decision in college are very high.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And maybe some relief among, although the NBA guys don't really put up with anything. They just send you on your way. And most of the NBA coaches comport themselves a little less verbally than Dan does sometimes, it seems.
Yeah,
so.
They would have been excited to send him a lesson in his first 5 games.
If they would
the NBA.
They would have been looking for him. They would have been looking for him.
Somebody would have got a steak dinner out of being the first one to throw him out of a game. There's no doubt about that.
Pete, there's a chance, although I'm not fully committed yet, that I'm going to see you in person tomorrow at one of these camps.
Yes,
in Springfield,
Bone
Mass.
Camp, Rece, Best of New England at Springfield College, put together by the intrepid Springfield College football staff. Steve Martin over at Springfield Central, which has a ton of big-time players, especially for a public high school in Massachusetts. They put together a big show, so there's going to be coaches from all over the Northeast, and going to be a lot of dudes who we'll be seeing in college in the upcoming years. So hopefully you can make it, Rece. I am excited to head to the 413.
I'm in the area, so for a little while. So I might take a quick spin up there before I leave town tomorrow afternoon. So no promises, Pete. But if I see you, I'll be delighted to visit in person.
They have a parking space reserved for you with the coaches right by the door. So you know.
Are they really?
Yeah, they're ready. They're ready for Rece Davis to come to the Bone Camp. So
that's fantastic. Well, that's encouraging. That might even persuade me a little bit.
We all like a good parking space. So
before we dive into a few teams under the radar, and we're going to do a little love it or hate it, few things going on in college football. The last few days, we were shooting our Home Depot commercials, which we do. It's sort of Lee Corso says it is a line of demarcation that lets him know we've turned the corner and the season is on the way. Once we show up and start shooting those. So there was some football talk that was had among us there. Kirk, Desmond, LC, Nick Saban. Wait till you see Nick Saban in some of these commercials. I mean, you've seen him in athletic commercials, so it's not going to be completely foreign, but he's got some acting chops. Although I do think they've typecast him a little bit as a coach.
You do think they what as a coach?
I think they've typecast him just a bit as a coach.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he's played the part pretty well. So I think he'd do all right. It would be it's more realistic seeing him in a Home Depot commercial than it was seeing Jay Wright in a Lowe's commercial when he did those for a few years when he was at Villanova with his like manicure, perfect hair. I was like, yeah, I don't see Jay Wright throwing on some sweats and doing a home improvement project. What
is this Lowe's that you speak of? What is that?
It's a inferior competitor.
Oh, right, exactly. Okay, I might have heard of them, but I'm not sure.
With a poor choice of coaching actors.
The only thing about Jay, I agree with you. I'll bet Jay might be a little bit handier than one would imagine. But my biggest disappointment in Jay Wright as a coach was when he spent some time later in his career dressing as if he were about to do DIY, do-it-yourself project at home, where he should have gone to the Home Depot to get his supplies. But that was disappointing. But otherwise, he probably. Hey, Pete. Speaking of home, you know how we talk about that you and I can't do anything in the house, right? We've discussed this before.
Oh yeah, no, many times. My ineptitude is epic and often criticized at home. There's love it or hate it segments about my incompetence around the house.
Okay, let me tell you this. I bought one of these Ring cameras to put on the outside of the house. We had some. I added one. I was adding one, And in the past, someone has taken care of that for us. But this one, when it was installed, because of how I needed it installed, it was upside down. I did not know that you could not, on that particular camera, turn the video orientation all the way around. I thought, well, you just hang it upside down. You'll go into the app. You'll turn the video orientation around and it'll be fine. Well, you can't do it with this camera. So I went online. I found the proper new bracket, took it down, put it up, works like a charm. I know it's simple to some people. I'm not rewiring the electrical panel there. I get that. But, my dad would be so disappointed because my dad, and I had to help growing up too, but I was always just trying to get finished so I could go play ball someplace. He could do all of that stuff. He could take a car apart and put it back together. I mean, we didn't hire anybody to do anything, but I was mostly the manual labor then. I don't think I really learned what I should have at the time.
Well, there's some promise here in South Boston because a new development at Teddy Thamel's daycare this week is that he has an affinity for tool sets. That's his new toy there. He'll go and he'll find the screwdriver and the hammer, which already really puts him a step ahead of me. And
if he knows the difference between the Phillips head and the flat head, is he a step ahead? Is that it?
Yes, that is pretty much it. We had a handyman here once because our dishwasher was broke, and Teddy was like staring at him, walking around like he thought it was the most interesting thing in the world. I was like, in his defense, he's never really seen anybody do this stuff before. So.
It's a new thing, and we might see perhaps teams do things that they haven't done before. The advent of the expanded playoffs going to give more teams opportunities. Give me a team that you're bullish on in one of the conference. I don't say they have to make the playoffs, but a team that you are bullish on that might be on this 13th day of June flying under the radar just a hair. Start with the Big Ten because this is a little bit of cheating because I know a team you like in the Big Ten.
Yeah. So I think when I look at the Big Ten for this year, I can see a leap coming from Nebraska. I watched their spring game a couple weeks ago, Rece. They have a bunch of talent at receiver, which you might not have necessarily said last year. They have an upgrade seemingly coming at quarterback with Dylan Raiola, and they sort of have a sneaky amount of returning starters on the offensive line, which I always look at, as our listeners know from our Florida State offensive line conversations last year, as a key part. But if you look at Jamal Banks, who is a dynamic receiver at Wake Forest, a high-end ACC receiver, he comes in. Isaiah Nair comes in from Texas via Wyoming, where he was very productive. It didn't work out for him at Texas, but he's still a really, really good player. And their defense was excellent last year too. So, and I think for all the portal and all the focus we put on who's going where and all that stuff, Rece, there's some value to continuity and growing as a program. That still exists as something in college where you go from year one to year two and you bring teams along. They get tougher, they get stronger, they evolve. And remember, weightlifting was not something under the Scott Frost regime that was a big deal. They were a tempo team, Bobby Petrino's teams over the years, they're running wind sprints. They're not doing bench press. There's, you focus on in your program what's important to you. And in Matt Rowe's program, the weight room is very important. They just actually opened a new weight room in Lincoln in the last couple of days. It's all over social media. I was joking with some folks there that'll actually be the last palatial weight room in the history of college football because the money's going to go to the players now.
I was just about to say that.
$300 million waivers. But I did, when we had the draft in Kansas City last year, I went through Lincoln on my way down. And it was, look, all these things are nice, right? But it was big. It has escalators in it, built for efficiency, really cool. So that positions them well in a lot of ways for the future. Because if you have a weight room that's feeling a little tired right now, it's just going to get a little sleepier. So I am in on the Huskers. The schedule, Rece, which obviously is always just a critical part of this conversation, right? Seems to line up pretty well. Now, some of that is how bullish you are with Colorado, right? I think you and I are a little skeptical from previous pods. So they go UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois at home, Purdue on the road, and then Rutgers, who I think also is going to be very good, by the way. They return basically their whole defense. They'll have an upgrade at quarterback with Ethan Kaliak-Manis. I mean, I think Nebraska's leap could be more toward the playoff. I'm not saying there. I think Rutgers could go from 7 to 8, maybe 9 if things fall well for them. I would not sleep on the Rutgers defense. Their schedule, Rece, and this is the quirks of these new big conferences now. They lose Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. They gain USC, UCLA, and Washington. So I am a believer in Jedd Fisch, but I don't think we're going to see the immediate translation of Jedd Fisch because I just don't think the talent is there. There was just an exodus to the NFL, an unprecedented NFL year for Washington, and then there was an exodus of really good players in the program to Alabama and other places. So that sets up pretty well for Rutgers, but I don't think Nebraska will be an underdog in a game until they go to Ohio State on October 26th. So there's a good runway for them to find their footing. Michigan is not on their schedule. Penn State is not on their schedule. So Oregon is not on their schedule. So I really feel like things are set up for a jump this year for Matt Rule, whose record in college would indicate year 2 is when things really begin to turn.
Those are the two teams. And I don't know, we've spent a lot of time together. I wasn't thinking Nebraska. I was thinking Rutgers first. I don't think they're a playoff team. The schedule's a big deal, but their defense will be back, and they've shown some improvement for all of the reasons you mentioned. And, I think there'll be a team that will, they have a chance to start sneaking around the edge of the conversation for the playoff due to their schedule if they get off to a good start. And that game early October in Lincoln against Nebraska will probably see whether one of those can fight their way into the, bottom half of the top 20, something like that. Are they lurking around? Can they pull the upset? That kind of thing. One of the things that's interesting is I was reading some things earlier this week about USC, about what constitutes success for USC. And there are those who follow that program who are saying that, hey, look, they win 9 games. That'll be a pretty good run for the Trojans. And, that's one of the teams that Rutgers faces in late October. It's a road game.
Late October USC is accurate because it's at an 11 p.m. kick Eastern time. Yeah. So that is late in October.
They'll have the opportunity perhaps not to be completely overmatched, although I think USC is probably a little more talented with the addition of defensive coordinator Deion Sanders. Maybe they'll find a little bit of defense as well. Let's talk Big 12 real quickly. A couple of teams I really like there that I think are probably, I don't know if under the radar is the right word because of some recent success they've had, but you don't think of them in terms of potential conference champions over the last few years. And that would be Arizona and Kansas. Kansas first, assuming Jalen Daniels is back and healthy. They've done a good job getting it some transfers. Lightfoot's a great developer of talent. I think if you look for who's going to take control in the Big 12, obviously TCU, and I think with the Oklahoma State returners, those are the two teams that people are going to gravitate to initially. I think Kansas and then Arizona with that potentially prolific passing attack, even with the new coach and Brent Brennan, with Noah Fafita, Tedero McMillan at wide receiver, who I think is going to be a first-team All-American. We've talked about that on the pod in the past. I think those are a couple of teams that you should keep an eye on in the Big 12 for an opportunity. Those two teams, I think, have the opportunity to win the conference and maybe get a playoff spot.
Yeah. I'll think, and we'll know July 9th. I just booked my travel to Big 12 Media Days, Rece, in Las Vegas. We'll know who the favorite is in the league. My hunch is that the favorite will be Utah. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Someone asked me, I might have told you this already. I was on with our buddy Ian Fitzsimmons, and Ian Fitzsimmons said to me, he said, what would you tell Big 12 teams as they get ready to welcome Utah into the league? And I said, make sure that your shoulder pads and your headgears are in good working order, because you are going to need them, against Utah. They will be all due respect to, Texas, Oklahoma, very physical teams. They will be as physical, if not the most physical, ill-tempered bunch of lads that you will have seen in that league in quite some time. Ill-tempered in a within the rules kind of way, by the way. I'm talking about within on the field, ill-tempered, very nice gentlemen off the field. Inside the white line, they have a mean streak, and that's a good thing.
Between the tackle boxes, Utah has been one of the best programs in college football the last decade. Period. End of story. You could certainly put Alabama there. You could put Georgia there. You could put Michigan there in recent years, right? But Utah is in the top 5 in that conversation. Just consistently between the tackles, both sides of the ball. Developing an identity, a style, and a physical violence, right? A brutality that has just defined their program and Kyle Whittingham's long run there. So I'm with them as the favorite, Rece. I'm going to take K-State as, a potential playoff team to watch. As listeners of this podcast know, I may actually grow a mullet because I'm part of the Avery Johnson fan club, and I am such a believer in Avery Johnson that I really just think he just looks different when he runs the ball, Rece. I don't know how else to say it. So I feel like beyond, he now settles in as the full-time starter there. And from there's some nice pieces around him. DJ Giddens really emerged as a star tailback there. Remember, Trayshawn Ward came in last year from Florida State, and everybody thought he was getting, DJ Giddens just was better. Now, Trayshawn Ward is actually at Boston College in the offseason shuffle, and I think he could do really well there. He was a very good back in the ACC. So I bring this up to say that, like, DJ Giddens as a redshirt junior next year really has a chance to be one of the top end backs in the league. And again, from there you go to identity, right? Like, Chris Kleiman's teams, from his time at North Dakota State, from his time there, they're going to be solid. They're going to be sound. They're not going to beat themselves. Joe Klanderman has proven the past few years to be one of the top defensive coordinators in college football. They're going to have another really stout unit on that side of the ball. The quarterback run game element is going to give them a chance. K-State's never going to throw over 600 yards against you, but the quarterback run game element gives them a chance to control the games, potentially shorten games if that's what they want to do. So I have some faith in Kansas State. Yet I don't know if you remember last year, Rece, I picked them to win the Big 12. I was wrong. But I will say, the logic behind the pick, I don't regret, because it was there was obviously they obviously had Texas played as closely as anybody did in college football last year. And yeah,
I have an assignment for you, though. You mentioned the Avery Johnson mullet. Is it a mullet or is it an undercut? Because I have it on good authority that people who embrace the undercut but like to have the flowing locks, they don't like it when it's called a mullet. So when you go to Vegas, find out if he refers to his coiffure as a mullet or an undercut. Undercut being that it's long everywhere and then kind of shaved on the sides, which you might pull off better than the actual mullet.
So if we're going to defer to hair expertise on this podcast, Rece Davis is going to be the person we go to. His hair hasn't moved since the day I met him. So I give him a lot of credit. Yes, I give him a lot of credit.
September 13th in Manhattan is the Arizona-Kansas State game.
Yeah, so they have a tricky game in week 2. They go to Tulane, and then I feel like for who will win the Big 12 and essentially compete for a playoff spot, maybe capture a spot in the Big 12 title game, Arizona at K-State is a pivotal Big 12 game early, and there'll be a lot of eyes on that game on a Friday night on a competing network. We often watch those games while we're preparing for College Game Day, and I enjoy a good Friday night game on any network. So,
no doubt.
Yeah, and so you go through the rest of the K-State schedule. They do not have They
don't have Texas or Oklahoma.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Do
you know how much getting used to this is all going to take for little things like that? Just little schedule nuggets about, USC Maryland as a conference game, that kind of thing. Or when you're looking at these schedules in the offseason, you go, wait a minute. To use a silly example, like everyone knows Texas and Oklahoma's going to the SEC, but for all of these years, you look and you see who these teams miss. In the last few years in the Big 12, prior to last year, you didn't miss anyone because they played everybody. But, historically, you've looked at these mega conference schedules and you said, hey, wait a second, they missed Florida State. They missed Florida State and Clemson. What a break for them. And that's often now in the ACC. You picked the Coastal Division winner was who missed Clemson, Florida State, or whatever,
I was going crazy, Rece, because I only saw 2 non-conference games on K-State's schedule. And I think they had a game, now that I looked, they had a game scheduled with Arizona. And it's on FBS schedules as a non-conference opponent for 2024. So I think that Arizona game might not be a league game. So forgive me for that.
That'll further add to the confusion, especially for a game like that. North Carolina and Wake Forest have done that a couple of times over the years to continue their series, which I think is brilliant. And even though they're continuing to play now, one of the things that we talk about rivalries going by the wayside because of these schedules. It was I know the Alabama-Tennessee thing came up a while back, and I was like, well, if for some reason one year, they aren't. The SEC changes the schedule and the way they come up with the permanent opponents and all of that, and they don't play. Just play as a non-conference game. Play. There are games that you need to play. But Kansas State, Arizona, I don't think that quite fits the bill. But some of the other ones would. So.
No, I believe one of the little news items out of ACC meetings was that North Carolina State and Virginia are going to do that in upcoming years. And look, like I'm not PT Barnum. I'm not going to, be any kind of marketing person, but like play teams your fans know and they may not like at least like your friends like, oh yeah, Virginia, I want to see that. If you play Middle Tennessee State or Minnesota, like they don't know. So like you might as well like bring familiarity. There's decades of history of Virginia playing NC State. So if you both want a power conference marquee game, I think it's a pretty smart thing to do to.
And as you start to revenue share with the players and start looking for ways to cut costs, my guess is you don't have to write a 7-figure check to Virginia, for instance, to do a home and home with you in Raleigh, as you might to have, someone from the Sun Belt come in and play you. So it's smart business too.
Yeah, and that's an asset on your season ticket schedule. Like people are like, oh, I want to go to the Virginia game. They're not like, oh, it's Furman or directional Louisiana or whatever. Like, and I'm not picking on anybody, but like if you live in Raleigh,
it's too late for that. You just picked on them.
Yeah, all the directions.
You could have said double. You could have said double directional. When you get the double directional, Southwestern insert state name, Northeastern insert state name.
That is fair. All directions. I throw shade on all directions this morning. They all go.
Okay, let's in our final moments here, and we'll continue to look at under the radar teams.
By the way, I just got word from K-State that is a non-con game against Arizona.
Is a non-conference game?
Yes, the Arizona game is non-conference. So thanks to the great Kenny Lanou for checking in on text to confirm my suspicion. I was really going nuts. I'm like, I see 10 Big 12 games on here. I'm like, are they still, is BYU's the Big 12? Like, anyway, I'm just glad that, and I vaguely remember this now from, like scheduling chatter last year, but yes.
That's one of the growing pains thing. It's not going to be, it's not, nuclear fission or something like that. But when things are ingrained in you, and then you also say, okay, now I know Arizona's a Big 12 team when they're playing a Big 12 opponent. This has to be a conference game. Those are the type things. It was like we've been talking about how best to explain the new college football playoff format. And still, we had a really simplistic 4-team format. And a lot of the research that our people did, even 10 years in, didn't fully get how the teams made the field. And I realize people are going to say, well, especially Florida State fans get upset. Yeah, I don't either right now. But and TCU fans from 2014, Baylor fans from 2014. But it's a pretty straightforward exercise. That was. This has more layers. And
explain it going to 14 in 2 years. Good luck with that. That's not 1,000%, by the way, but that's likely to happen, expected to happen, pretty much will happen. And yeah, like it's just going to confuse. Yes. I feel like a lot of covering college football is explaining college football because
and the thing is, Pete, is one of the things I'm going to try to do on the week 0 show is Dublin, depending on time. It's not paramount, but since that will be a season preview, I think the most effective way, and you have to do it more than once, we won't do it every week, obviously. The most effective way to lay out what the 12-team playoff is going to look like is to go back not to this most recent season, but the one before in 2022 and give the final CFP rankings, the conference champion designations as they stood at that time, and show people what that would look like on the bracket. And the reason I bring that up is because if you recall that year, 2 teams that made the 14 playoff were not conference champions, TCU and Ohio State. Therefore, they would not be one of the 4 seeds that got a bye. It would have been Utah and Clemson that year getting by.
Clemson was like 9th?
I think they were, I looked at this just the other day. I want to say they were 7, I think so. 7 or 8, something like that. And so they would have gotten one of the buys. So you're going to have to explain that, and we'll try to set it out. We'll try to remind people, and I can still guarantee you if something like that were to happen on selection day, people are going to lose their minds because, for the most part, I try to be very understanding and not dismissive of fans because fans, even hardcore fans, they follow their team and probably their biggest rivals in their conference because they've got lives, they've got jobs, they've got kids, they've got, other concerns. They're not diving into this. Hopefully they're listening to our podcast and they're enjoying football, but they're not diving into the minutia every second of the day. So some of this is going to hit a fairly significant portion of pretty good college football fans. Like, wait, what do you mean TCU's the 3 seed, but they don't have, or the ranked 3rd, but they don't have the 3rd seed? That's going to be a little bit boring for a little while. So.
Yeah, no, there's going to be some "can I buy a vowel?" like I don't get it type moments here, and when you have a 130 team conglomeration with nobody in charge and no sort of central fulcrum of rulemaking, meaning obviously there's somebody who's making the rules about like the clock stopping, but when you basically have that large of a group with nobody in charge, there's inherently going to be confusion, Rece. That just is what it is, right? And there's going to be, clear as mud was one of the terms at SEC meetings a bunch of the administrators used, and I've adopted that because a lot of things in college athletics are clear as mud.
I really enjoy hearing you pick up on the occasional Southern vernacular, some colloquialisms from SEC territory. That's fun. Hey, one of our producers, Sean, suggested that we do a little love it or hate it, some quick rapid fire stuff. I'm going to fire these things at you. Give me a quick take on whether you love it, hate it, or if you're a little more balanced and detached. You can take the middle road, as you and I often do, to try to see both sides of an issue, which is a rarity in our culture these days. But you and I do it expertly, so they could take a lesson from us. That aside, love it or hate it, current state of the transfer portal.
I would say I love that players can now move. I hate that college football is trending toward college basketball, where there's so much movement, it has become unrecognizable. So I would love to have some sort of middle ground that allows for both players to not get trapped as they were in prior iterations of this, yet that rosters don't turn over by such an unwieldy percentage that we're not spending all August explaining to people who's on whose team. Like there has to be more of a middle ground here. And I think like they had tried to find that some with one time, and then they lost a bunch of court rulings because that's what the NCAA does. And again, I want to be explicit about this. I am for players going to find the best opportunities for them. But at some point, people who run the sport have to rein things in slightly so it doesn't look like college basketball, where legitimately no mainstream American sports fan knows who's on what team every year. That is bad for the sport in the long term.
Philosophically, I love it because in the old days, before the death of amateurism, we said, well, these guys are amateurs, they're student athletes, which is a made up term, which was literally a made up term to avoid workman's comp claims, probably 60, 70 years ago. But so philosophically, I like the transfer portal because if you're a student, you have a very short window, unless you're Cam McCormick, of playing college sports. So you should be able to go to school and play where you want to. That said, I do think some things are falling through the cracks as a result. Sometimes there are probably far too many instances of players being promised things elsewhere and finding out that the grass is not greener, or the promise is not delivered, or that their state is really no different than it was previously. And this is not about gritting your teeth and toughing it out. Sometimes the coach doesn't have the right vision of you as a player, or maybe he is right, but it doesn't agree with you. So you should go and try to pursue and be the best that you can be. But there are also other times where a guy would probably otherwise stay, but some extenuating circumstances push him in a certain direction. The whole college experience, both athletically and off the field as well, turns out not to be what it could have been. So that part of it I don't like, but philosophically, it's hard for me to do a 180 and say that I'm against college players playing where they want to play and going to school where they like to go to school, whatever the motivating factor. So basically, I'm okay with it, but there are some aspects of it that I agree with you. A better framework would work better. Let's go and do some things that are a little bit more fun here on Love It or Hate It. Here's one that might get you in trouble. Nick Saban's retirement. Love it or hate it?
I don't love it for college football because he was a defining coach of this generation and many generations. And, what a dynamic guy to cover. He was relentlessly fascinating. I love it for College Game Day. We got a new teammate, and I think we're really well positioned for another awesome year on College Game Day. We got a little glimpse of how dynamic Nick is at the draft. Just seeing him analyze players, seeing the depth and the level of his preparation was unbelievable. So yeah, but I do think like his departure creates a really fascinating void in the sport, right? There's a leadership void. There's an SEC void. Obviously, Kirby Smart rolls in at the head of that. But I think the college football is interesting every year. There's so many dynamics. But post Saban college football is going to be a fascinating place because the defining coach of the generation is gone.
He's the greatest to ever do it, and I'll stand on that hill of Bear Bryant legend. Woody Hayes, Newt Rockne, Frank Leahy, whoever else you want to bring up. Nick Saban is the greatest college coach in the history of the sport. And I agree with you, for the sport, it's a huge loss. And I guess you could say you hate it. But my first loyalty, I'm on scholarship with ESPN College Game Day, so I love it. I think he's going to be fantastic. Just the last couple of days shooting those commercials and being around it, you don't just sit there and talk football the whole time, talk a number of things. He's a fascinating guy on a number of levels, but his ability to communicate and get through his understanding of players and talking about coaching different players with different personalities and how he came to that realization that he gave the example of a player that he had who was a great player for him. And if he didn't know what to do, he would just stop because he was so, I think he said, ordinarily back in the old days, I would have yelled at him, don't stop on the play. He said, but some of the people who worked with him said he needs to know what to do, and you're going to get more out of him if you pull him aside and say, hey, here's what you were supposed to do. Now, there are other guys you have to yell at. And we've seen Nick throw the hat. It's not like, Nick never yelled at anybody. But his self-awareness to figure out that something that football coaches sometimes aren't prone to do historically, this guy needs to be coached one way, this guy needs to be coached another. And then to be able to do it. There are a lot of guys who say that and then they can't do it. Then in all sports, they just can't do it. They just yell and go. But his ability to do that and to talk about it and relay those stories, fascinating. It's going to be a big, big addition for our show. Let me ask you this one then. Deion Sanders on X, love it or hate it?
I feel like a lot of his tweets are just generalities, right? Like there's some religion in there, there's some leadership in there. I'm pretty neutral on Deion Sanders on X. I feel like some of the more provocative stuff he does is either in press conferences or amid the media machine that follows him around and produces content. So I feel like on X. Now, Shador on X has been a little more interesting. The level of provocation has not been mid for Shador this year. So
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Couple quick things. I too pretty neutral on it. I actually find Deion to be a pretty fascinating guy, not just because of his charisma, but because I don't know why I love to point this out. I just think he's a tough, old school guy in so many ways, and then other ways there's the flash and the charisma. I enjoy a lot of the stuff I could do without wading into the mid stuff with former players. And I saw him on a podcast recently. We should try to get him on too. That would be an undertaking. We'll try it. But I saw him on there basically saying, yeah, I had too much time on my hands that day. Paraphrasing here, obviously. Yeah, maybe not. Which I like too. The ability to say, that might not have been my best tweet or whatever. Sean, which school has the best pregame tradition? Love it or hate it? I think gotta love all the pregame traditions. So I'll take some poetic license here. Which entrance, as we get ready for the season, which entrance to a stadium sends chills up the trusty old Pete Thamel journalist? I don't give any emotion when you see a certain team go through a certain entrance. Which one gives you the warm fuzzies, the tingles there, Peter?
This is slight recency bias, but I don't think anybody's going to top Army Navy. I mean, that was a spectacle of coming in, bagpipes, you got flyovers, that was unbelievable. That was the first time this year when College Game Day was at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, that I had attended Army Navy. I actually, after our show, attended the game as a fan, which is a very rare thing and a joyous thing, by the way. And man, that hour before the game was unlike anything I'd ever seen in college football. And I've seen all the entrances and heard all the roars. And that was something else. So that would be hard for me to top.
I'm going to get very specific on you. And I agree with you. Army Navy is really cool. I need two caveats to one that will really get me going. One.
Two things before you say something else. That's the Rece
not like
special.
One, this team needs to be good. And if they're good, and big game, good, big game, enter Sandman touching the Hokie Stone, Virginia Tech coming out of Lane Stadium is really hard to beat. Really hard to beat.
Let's hope the echoes awaken there, because that would be fun to have Virginia Tech back in the conversation. And they are trending there, by the way, under Brent Pry. They have a quarterback now. The defense is getting back to levels. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun to see Virginia Tech back in the conversation again this year.
It would be, for sure. Maybe they will be our under the radar team when we do the ACC on a subsequent podcast. So, lost a legend in the last few days as we close. Certainly our condolences to the people who knew and loved Jerry West, the NBA logo, the West Virginia grade, who I had the opportunity in several occasions over the years to be around. And when we did the old college basketball awards show, and of course the Jerry West Award for the best shooting guard in the country. And he was also around on some trips to West Virginia over the years too. So what a powerful figure in all of sports, particularly in basketball. And certainly left an indelible mark on the sport at every conceivable level.
Yeah, Woj did a nice tribute to him on ESPN.com this week, Rece, and it's worth reading. And I actually had an understanding of the scope of Jerry West, but to read it distilled the way that Woj did it, it was just really, really powerful to go, obviously player, executive, like trailblazer. Like there was just he had a quintessential American basketball life and was one of the most transformative figures in basketball the last century. So, prayers with his with his family, and what a life.
He was a remarkable player, remarkable executive, remarkable guy, powerful figure in the presence across the spectrum of sport. Thanks for listening to the College GameDay Podcast. We encourage you to subscribe or download wherever you prefer to get your podcast.